the 14th Amendment was a total game changer. The 14th Amendment says, well, for our purposes, we're just going to try to hit the most important three parts of it, okay? I know that you're going to be mad at me. You're going to be like, Professor, I want to know all the details about the 14th Amendment. And I say to you, no, you can't have them. All I'm giving you are the three most important parts. Okay, first, if you're born in the U.S., you're a citizen. It's the easiest way to understand it. If you're born in the U.S., you're a citizen. The vast majority of black people had been born here. And so the effect of this is to end the ambiguity about black people's citizenship. That topic that was in many ways the focus of the book that we read this semester. Now it's clear. If you're born here, you're a citizen. Second, and the second and third parts that I'm referring to are down in the text on the slide in the last 4 lines. Second, no state can deprive any person of life, liberty, or property without due process of law. No state can deprive any person of life, liberty, or property without due process of law. And third, no state can deny any person the equal protection of the laws. The idea was simple. Laws apply to everyone. States can't make laws and say, oh yeah, these are the laws that apply to black people. No, if you make laws, they apply to everyone. The Republicans who pushed for this amendment included many Republicans who believed deeply in racial equality. But the Republicans who voted for it also included people who didn't care that much about black equality and had different motivations. For some it was vengeance. For some it was simply power. Nevertheless, the amendment gets the 2/3 vote from the House and Senate, because those 11 southern states still aren't in the House and Senate. And then the amendment, remember, has to be ratified by 3/4 of the states. Maryland was furious. Maryland voted against the 14th Amendment. Maryland voted against the 14th Amendment in 1867, but did ratify it later in 1959. Yeah, that's right, 1959, when the state of Maryland said, okay, we're on board with this. All right, so way in the future. But here in 1867, Maryland rejected the amendment, as did the states further south. Remember, the states further south thought that President Johnson was going to be lenient on them. And now here comes Congress trying basically to make those white Southerners accept black equality. To quote one of those white Southerners, hell no. So the Southern states rejected the 14th Amendment. They hoped that Andrew Johnson would save them. There's Johnson's quote down there when he vetoed the Civil Rights Act. This is a country for white men, and by God, as long as I am president, it shall be a government for white men. That's who we're dealing with over there. Congress was furious at the Southern states' recalcitrance angry at their refusal to accept the 14th Amendment. And so Congress passed the Reconstruction Act in 1867. This is the most radical part of what people called radical Reconstruction. The Reconstruction Act disbanded 11 state governments. The 11 states who had, seceded and brought about the war, this law said, hey, you 11 states, you no longer have state governments. Just dissolved your state government and sent military generals in to occupy the southern states until those 11 southern states hold new constitutional conventions and write brand new constitutions. Now that's kind of radical, right? Okay, so you got to have a constitutional convention, you got to write a whole new constitution. Here comes the more radical part. In those elections, to pick the guys who will write the new state constitutions, all men can vote. Holy crap, the law allowed formerly enslaved men to become voters, to pick the men who would write the constitutions. It's the beginning of black political participation in these 11 states. And then, also in the Reconstruction Act, it says that those new constitutions that the states are going to write, they must ratify the 14th Amendment. I don't think this is the way the founders envisioned constitutional ratification. Like, hey, you've got to ratify this or we won't let you have political power back. But then again, I don't think the founders envisioned civil war and the circumstances that the nation was now in. So this law led to black people all through those 11 states entering politics. Those elections to pick the people who would write the new state constitutions, they were the most dramatic expansion of democracy in the country's history. 800,000 black men voted for the first time in those elections. And across these 11 states, it began an era of black people not just voting, but of black men being elected to office. And none of this was happening in Maryland. Right? Maryland, remember, didn't join the Confederacy. So none of this was happening in Maryland. It also wasn't happening in the former slave states of Kentucky or Missouri, because remember, they didn't rebel either. So back in Maryland, the governor, while these dramatic national events were playing out, was Thomas Swan. You remember that beard, don't you? Swan was the former Know-Nothing mayor of Baltimore, back when the Know-Nothings were at the peak of their violence in the 1850s. Swan then went on to be governor from 1866 to 1869. And by the time he was governor, the Know-Nothing Party had collapsed, and he was part of the Union Party. That was the loyalists in Maryland who weren't willing to call themselves Republicans. But they were loyalists, right? Loyal to the United States. He had backed Lincoln. But then Lincoln gets assassinated, and remember, Andrew Johnson becomes the new president, and Johnson made it really clear that he was on the side of white Southerners, while the Republicans in Congress wanted to create multiracial democracy. Right? So it's like, which side are you on? Are you on the side of the Republicans in Congress who want to allow black people rights? Or are you on the side of President Johnson who wants to stop that? Swan cast his lot with Andrew Johnson. As Swan put it, Negro equality will destroy the state of Maryland. So, Swan got rid of the loyalty oaths that had limited white Marylanders' political participation during the war. Remember, that's how they got the 1864 Constitution approved. That's how they got slavery ended in Maryland. They didn't let the disloyal people vote. Well, Swan now said, hey, disloyal people, come on back. Come on back. And with the disloyal Marylanders now back in the political system, Maryland called for a constitutional convention. And here, as I move us to that constitutional convention, my next to last weird pause for county updates. 1867, Wicomico County was created as a new entity carved out of Somerset and Worcester counties. So new county down there on the base of the eastern shore. I just didn't want to get this far and not tell you about the last two counties. So this one, and then we got one more. But our focus is that constitutional convention that you were so excited about. 1867, voters in Maryland were asked to pick delegates to write a new constitution. Now remember, this is at the same time that the former Confederate states are writing new constitutions. But what was happening in Maryland was totally different beneath the surface. All through those 11 states that were the Confederacy, black men were going to vote to pick delegates for constitutional conventions, along with loyal white men. But the most disloyal, again in those 11 southern states, were not allowed to vote for delegates to the constitutional conventions. In Maryland, black men can't vote, and the disloyal can. So it's a very different kind of gathering. Do you remember, I'd be impressed if you do, do you remember Richard Carmichael? He was the Democratic judge who got arrested during the Civil War. Soldiers actually dragged him off the bench during court. Carmichael was now presiding over the 1867 Constitutional Convention. That is a sign of how much things have shifted in Maryland in just a few years. It's a conservative gathering. I mean, if they could, they would bring slavery back. But they can't. The 15th Amendment's been approved. They wanted to undo as much of the 1864 Constitution as they could. The Republicans across the state urged voters to reject this new 1867 Constitution. But the voters were down for it. And the new Constitution, once approved by voters, was more conservative than the one that had come before. One area where they could not roll the clock back, though, was on public schools. The people liked public schools. And so the new Constitution kept the public school system intact. Property owners pay a little tax on the assessed value of their property. The state then distributes that money to the counties and to Baltimore based on each place's school age population. After the Constitution took effect, Baltimore became the first place in the state to allocate black people's taxes for black schools. Because systematic discrimination kept black people disproportionately poor, that meant that the schools for black children in Baltimore were inferior, but it was better than the rest of the state, where in a lot of cases what it meant was that as black people pay in taxes, your taxes pay for white kids' schools. In Baltimore, at least, they set aside your taxes and they're like, okay, that's for schools for your people. The Constitution was approved by voters easily. Thomas Swan went on to rail against black equality and all of Reconstruction as a member of the House of Representatives. You'll have to wait for Odin Bowie.